Glad to see so many people, and folks at home hopefully can hear us. So I am Jody McDonald. I'm the program chair for the Acton Garden Club, and I'm very happy to be once again collaborating with the Acton Conservation Trust and with Energize Acton, and also this year with Silver Unicorn Bookstore. So it's great to be able to bring a program, a meaningful program to our community, and thank you so much for being here. I'm just going to take a moment to tell you a little bit about our three groups. The Garden Club, you probably know us best from our plant sale every spring at the Red House. We've been around for, I think it's 92 years now. Oh, you know what that is? Somebody at home is not muted. Please, everybody, mute at home. And the great thing about our plant sale is that all of the plants, that the perennials that we sell are from our members. We dig them up from our own yards, we donate them, and so you know that they're good, healthy plants that will grow really well in this environment. And then all the money that we make from the plant sale, that's what we use to do the things that we do. And what do? We have 3 gardens in town that we maintain, also a lot of planters and troughs in town. But probably the more exciting thing is the programs that we run. There's a program with the local schools, gardening with young people. Also, we have a program, garden therapy, that we do in cooperation with Emerson Hospital. And we do 7 public educational programs right here in room 204 throughout the year that is open to the public and free, that everybody is welcome to join. The information is on our website. And tonight's presentation is part of our Shirley Toll lecture series. Shirley was a longtime member and past president of the club, and she bequeathed a sum of money to be sure that we would be able to do these programs in the evening to help reach out to the community and get people interested in gardening and the environment and making a difference. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to, is it David who's here? I'm going to tell you about the Acton Conservation Trust.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and represent the Acton Conservation Trust. I hope you all know about us, but I'm going to take a moment to explain it. We are a nonprofit corporation. We're not part of the town government, but we work very closely with the town government on issues related to our main function, which is, as it says here, preservation of open space. So our goal is to seek to get as much open space in the town preserved by whatever methods are available. And that's what we've been doing now for about 30 years. So one of the tools that we use for that is, if you're a landowner and you don't want your land to be developed, but you'd like to maybe receive some compensation for that, but more importantly, know that it will never be developed, we can do something like a permanent conservation easement. Okay, and so without getting into too much detail, it's a legal document that grants the development rights to our organization rather than to the individual, but it does not change ownership. So it's a very important thing. It's had a huge impact across Massachusetts and the rest of the country. We also accept gifts and donations for purchase of land. And we have, as some of you may be aware, we have donated considerable amount of funds to help purchase open space, including some outright purchase on our own. And then once we have acquired these lands, we hold them, we monitor them, and we make sure that they are protected throughout, and perpetuity is actually what we say. But maybe most important thing we do, which is should be at the beginning of this list, is we try to educate owners about the options they have. The options could be to develop, it could be to do nothing, it could be a number of different tools that exist in the Commonwealth and in the United States to preserve land, get some return for it, guarantee that it will last in perpetuity, a whole bunch of different things that could be changed to suit the needs of the particular landowner. But here's an example of what we have done recently. If you remember the campaign for Weatherby Woods, the big property we just bought over off of Route 2. We started that project about 20 years ago, and that's the way these things go. And it started with a person-to-person, one of our officers with the owner, and following it through their family, changes in the family, and getting it to the point where the owner said, yes, we want to do that. And so then, in the end, of course, working closely with the town, we managed to purchase that and also make a significant donation as well. These other slides basically just show you we've done this numerous times. And so when you think about a lot of these open spaces, particularly the, I think, 400 new acres that we've preserved since we've been busy, they're long-term projects. They require everybody's participation. And we're there sort of as, once we get the thing going, we're there as the people who push the project going, the people who cheerlead for the project, and obviously when we bring it to fruition, we're the ones who in some ways take stewardship for the project. So I'd like to say we preserved a lot of open space, 400 acres, most of which, this is Acton, most of which is woods. And so I'm reading Linda's book right now, and it's really resonating, although our trees aren't as big, it's really resonating with what we have going on here. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to hearing what Linda has to say.
Hi, I'm Karen Root-Watkins with EnergizeActon.org. Energize Acton was born out of the climate emergency declaration here at Acton Town Meeting in 2020, and we're co-sponsored by the Acton Sustainability Office and the Acton Climate Coalition. One thing that we say often is that how we use energy matters. It matters for the natural world, and it matters for our future. And so a lot of what Energize Acton does is related to helping provide resources for people to reduce their carbon footprints and move off of fossil fuels. The idea that we're not contributing to climate warming. So a lot of our programming is clean energy home tours, peer sharing, presentations about air source heat pumps, things that I never thought I would be doing as an elementary school teacher. But the other side of Energize Acton is trying to educate people about the importance of nature-based solutions, and that's why we're here tonight. How we use energy matters for our natural world, but the health of our natural world matters for us. And that's one reason why we're so excited to have Linda here. The Garden Club and the Acton Conservation Trust, we've done this 2 years previous, and we focused more on gardens and creating more biodiversity in our own backyards and healthy environments in our backyards. This year, I think we were looking at trees and thinking about trees, and many of you may be a little worried about trees in your own neighborhood or in your own backyards. We have 3 beech trees that for the first time this year are showing signs of beech leaf disease. But it's not just our backyards. My husband and I went walking in conservation land in the forest in Carlisle nearby, and all the beech trees are dying. And so, it's a very complicated picture, but I think reading Linda's book, it's a great reminder that we're all connected. And she's done it in her own writing. Linda was here 10, 12 years ago doing a really great fellowship from MIT, doing research in Harvard Research Forest, and wrote a beautiful book, which is there on the table, called The Witness Tree. So she was looking at one tree over 1 year and what it could teach us. But now with her new book, she's looking at the big picture. Like, what is an intact old growth forest like? What the ecological miracle of it? And so there's one phrase that she uses numerous times in the book, and it's that we are all connected. And there's a lot in her book that's very sobering, but a lot that's very inspiring and miraculous. And I'd like to welcome Linda to come up. We look forward to finding out what we can do to support trees near and far.
Thank you for joining us, Linda V. Mapes.
I want to ask you if you can hear me really comfortably. Is it loud enough? Okay, let's.
For them to hear you at home, would you need to?
Okay, let's crank it up. Jody is going to make it good, I promise. We practiced earlier and it was truly deafening, so we'll get it right. I want you to be able to hear me comfortably. I did a talk a couple nights ago, and someone came up to me afterward and said, I couldn't hear you. And I was like, why didn't you tell me? I'm here for you. So if at any time it kind of falls off or whatever, raise your hand and we'll fix it. I want to tell you how pleased I am to be here. This is my very favorite kind of talk to do with community people, garden clubs, bird clubs, tree conservation people, land trusts, land conservation groups. I think of you all as the ground troops. You are the people on the ground making the kind of difference that is absolutely essential right now, especially in our world with things, shall we say, a little kerflooey upstairs. With the federal government, it is time for the local people to take care of what needs to be taken care of here at home with our trees that matter in a planetary kind of way. So never forget just how important your work as individuals in one town are. And the minute I walked in here and I saw the home-baked treats and I saw the homemade sign out front, I thought, hot dig, I can't wait. So I'm really delighted to be here.
Where you want me to be?
Yep, that's where I want you to be. And how is the volume? All good? Yeah? Great. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we're going to do tonight. I was showing you those slides as you found your seats, and that's my field work over the last several years for this book. So when you're a reporter, which I've been for 40 years at newspapers, very often you're surprised in the course of your work, and that's always a good sign, because it means you're actually learning something new rather than just checking off a list and filling in boxes. So this book was that in spades. It's not at all the book I thought I was going to write. It turned into a much different story. Basically, what we're going to talk about tonight is not only old growth trees and why they matter, the magnificence of these old growth forest ecosystems, but the connected history from the East Coast to the West and continuing in British Columbia of how we lost so much of it. And basically, that's a story about the displacement of the original knowledge systems that were here managing these magnificent forests for thousands of years until we came and brought in a new system, which is basically commodification and the financialization of nature, which today has progressed to a pretty frightening extent and has given us what we have. And what we have today is a situation where the forests we have created and the climate we have created cannot coexist. And basically what the trees are telling us, the title of this book, The Trees Are Speaking, is that what we really need today isn't just a conversation about logging. That's not enough. I mean, to me, logging almost seems quaint as an issue. Talking about do more of it here or less of it here, or do it there but not over there. Honestly, what we're facing now is a climate that is killing our trees, these hot droughts where they cannot sustain themselves, combined with global capitalism and unchecked commerce of all kinds of plants coming into this country without adequate phytosanitary control. Shall we list the insects? Shall we list the diseases? I mean, it's shocking to me to come back to the Harvard Forest and to the forest of Massachusetts. I've been coming here now since 2013, and honestly, I'm seeing forests that are protected at the Harvard Forest, in the Adirondacks, elsewhere, that are in advanced stages of decline. So it's not only about logging, and it's very much about something much more profound. What I want to talk to you tonight is thinking about changing our relationship with forests, to think about them not only as sources of wood, of products, but actually as kin, as non-human relations that are actually just as important as the rest of our kin, because they give us every third breath, they give us clean water, they cool the temperatures, and our world's forests are absorbing a quarter of all the human-made fossil fuel emissions that are going into the atmosphere. So it isn't just the old trees that matter, and we're going to talk a lot tonight about why they particularly matter so much. Good people, every tree matters. Your town trees matter. The trees in your dooryard matter. The trees in your town forest matter. I'm thrilled to hear these local conservation efforts and these early early beseechings to people to think about what they want to do in their estate plan and think about their land in terms of gifting it for future generations that you will never meet, but who will benefit from your forests. So that's a little bit about what we're going to do tonight. I am going to read to you some. And I thought, looking around this room, I'm going to change it up tonight because there's something I think you might particularly enjoy. I'm a little worried about the feedback. Is that bothering you? Can we do something about that? Where I stand, if I'm back here, is it better? Okay, so I'm just going to have to go like that when I want to change the slides. Maybe this thing will work from a distance. No. All right, well, we'll get through it. Okay, so let's get started. This book. You want to do my slides? Okay, that'll be fun. This would be like turning pages on the piano bench, which is a fantasy of mine because I don't play piano and I'm hoping maybe someday I'll learn. I play violin, but to me, piano seems so much harder. Not only both hands, two clefs, but your feet. That's a lot. Don't you think? All right, let's get rolling. First slide. There we go. All right. So I was at the East Coast Old Growth Conference last week in Ripton, Vermont. All right, so you notice the words East Coast Old Growth Conference. So I hate to say it, you all are down to like 0.001% of your original old growth, and a lot of it because of the species involved. Honestly, it's not that big. So I put this up and I said, this is tree porn, and I admit it. If you come to the Pacific Northwest, and I truly hope you will, here's the place that you need to go. This is it's the Research Natural Forest that's run by the Forest Service in Cougar, Washington, and it's called Cedar Flats because of trees like this. So that's probably a 1,000-year-old cedar. What is so magnificent about these forest ecosystems that are truly old growth, it isn't just that they're old. So an old growth tree in an old growth forest, it's so much more than just a tree that got old. It's a whole assemblage of very special properties. So yes, certainly a tree like this, and out where we are, our species can grow to truly spectacular size and very great age. Mother cedar, the Douglas fir, the spruce trees. These can grow for 400, 500, 600, 1,000 years. And they can be easily 200 feet tall and taller. So a Douglas fir, for instance, I call it God's greatest hit. A Douglas fir doesn't even begin to gain old growth characteristics until its 2nd century. So truly, these are long distance runners. These are magnificent species. We also have a very mild, wet climate, which is just what they want. We don't get much freezing temperature, not much snow. Basically, we get this kind of girly rain, really soft, misty, lovely rain. So it's like a terrarium most of the time. What could be better? So we get these magnificent, large trees. But, if you would please. So the man in the slide there is Jerry Franklin. He's an eminent forest ecologist, world famous, actually. Jerry, in the 1980s, with his collaborators, taught us most of what we know about old growth forests, that they are in fact a thing. Now, roll back to the 1980s, 70s, 60s, 50s. The US Forest Service regarded these old growth forests as decadent. And what they really wanted was thrifty young stands. Well, I take offense at that personally, given that I'm not a thrifty young stand and I'm more of an old growth tree myself. But you know, what Jerry and his collaborators were onto was, look what's in the background. Do you see all that sort of lovely thickety thick in the mess? That's dead and downed wood. And if you are walking through an old growth forest, it's very difficult to do. There's so much dead and down wood in the forest, and it has a very important ecological role. Nurse logs are called that for a reason. When you have an old growth, fallen down log, it becomes the next generation. It lies there and ever so slowly decomposes over many, many years. It's wet as a sponge, even on a hot summer day. And it's where the next generation of little baby trees roots. That's why it's called a nurse log. You will often see a colonnade of large trees, and you no longer see the log they sprouted on, which is long ago melted into the soil. So this is truly a kind of immortality. An old dead tree has more live cells in it than a live tree. All the nematodes, all the little things that are eating and dissolving that tree over time. And it becomes the food for the next generation. So dead and down wood, that is an element of an old growth forest. Next slide. The other thing that's important in an old growth forest is complexity. In biodiversity, many, many different species of trees. Next slide. But also all the other beautiful things, like this fantastic fungi sweating out its moisture. Next slide. The beautiful understory with the rich suite of native plants, like this vanilla leaf, all of the ferns. Next slide. Yes, these fantastic trees also provide an incredible amount of habitat for birds, for insects, for bears. These sorts of hidey holes at the bottom, these little caved in bases in the trunk, that's a perfect place to hibernate for all sorts of animals. The bark and long streamers, birds will actually nest under those streamers. And so many insects. There is a life in the canopy, all kinds of animals, all sorts of voles and others that never come down at all. That is their whole life up in the treetops of these spectacular forests. Next slide. And yes, of course, the moisture. This is a place that holds the moisture in the soil, which is so very important for moderating the climate. Next slide. Notice the structural complexity. We already talked about complexity of species and biodiversity, but take a good look at this slide. An old growth forest is not just a dome that makes a dim, dark place. Not at all. This is a forest that's been allowed to tell its long story uninterrupted by us and go through its long ecological evolutionary stages. So you have big old trees like the ones I showed you, but you also have gaps in the canopy, sunny spots where trees have fallen over. And in those spots, that's where the next generation rises. And so it's this structural complexity that's so important. The broken snaggletooth tops of the really old trees, the gaps where things have fallen over, the new rising young forest. An old growth forest is a place of complexity then on several levels: biodiversity, species diversity, and structural diversity. It should be a very messy, and I say that with great love, place. It is not tidy. Next slide. And I think the other thing I love about the old growth forests is the tiny beauty. We all get so wowed by the really big trees, but to see a fern, a single frond with its circinate vernation, you gardeners here in the room, I know you swoon over this. I certainly do. Next slide. And when I'm in a place like this, I think it's really true that an old forest is good for the human spirit. When you walk into a place like this, your tiny little mammalian life falls away. You finally feel yourself in the proper scale of this beautiful earth, of a short life, amid a vast intelligence of other beings that were here long before you and will be here long after you. And I take enormous solace in that. One of the things I usually do in a place like this is lie down and take a nap. Next slide. I love this slide for scale. So that's Jerry Franklin again, and you gotta love it, right? Take a look at the size of that thing. So keep an eye on that tree, and I'm gonna read to you because I wanna tell you what it's like to climb one of those trees. When I was writing this book, I really loved a long stay at the H.J. Andrews Experimental Forest, which is down outside of Eugene, Oregon. Most of the trees there, 3/4 of them are old growth, by which I mean 500 years and older. And I felt like if I was going to write about these trees, I need to feel it. I need to actually get up into one of these trees. And so Mark Schultz, the director of the forest, who is an expert tree climber, was willing to do that with me and go up in one of these trees. Now, I had climbed trees before at the Harvard Forest from my last book about trees, The Witness Tree, but that was a 100-year-old oak, about 110 feet tall. So it was sort of a cuddly little deciduous tree compared to this thing. So This thing glowered with gravitas. It was truly terrifying, but very important to do. So I want to read to you just a little bit about what that's like, because we got a room full of tree people here, and I thought I want to read them this. The climb began in a flurry and clatter of gear, clamping and snapping straps and buckles. I have always hated this part of tree climbing, the sudden alien rush of equipment, a reminder of the unnaturalness of this act. I'd climbed trees with rope and harness for research before, but those trees were less than half the size of the behemoth I was about to meet. Soon, the rhythm of equipping for a climb came back. Helmet, harness, climbing rope, threading through an ascender strapped to my foot. Things humans need to visit the realm of a really big tree. There are many methods for climbing. Using an ascender, as I chose to do, was a good choice for so high a climb. There was more here to take on than a simple fling of a loop of climbing rope around the tree and walking up the trunk. The trees I'd climbed before, East Coast oaks and sugar maples at the Harvard Forest, seemed cream puffs compared to this. They were all velvety leaves and comparatively smooth bark and topped out at 100 or so feet from the ground, which actually at the time seemed like a lot. But this was something else altogether. Long before what we now call Oregon or the United States were named, this wild tree sprouted. The seed of the discovery tree was nurtured within the scales of its cone. No bigger than the point of a pencil, its seed was one of millions produced by its parent tree over its lifetime. It had floated to earth on its brown wing and, unlike so many others, taken root on this forest floor, the perfect soft, moist medium. Its slender root had nurtured its lifting stem and grown to a trunk straight and steady. In time, the tree grew to dominate its grove, the biggest amid its neighbors, pushing through the canopy and pulsing with life through the years, century after century. Douglas fir is a long-distance runner that way. It doesn't really even begin to hit its stride until its second century. A native of the Pacific Northwest, it is a monarch of the Pacific Northwest woods, commonly living 500 years, and the most venerable can be nearly 3 times that age. Over their lifetimes, these grand old trees self-prune, dropping their branches from the bottom up, resulting in long, straight, branch-free trunks, towering to a short crown with a wind-blasted top. The bark, as the tree ages, becomes more than a foot thick and deeply grooved and takes on a dark, rich, reddish-brown color. Its twigs are densely quilled with needles, and the cones, 2 to 4 inches long, are perfectly symmetrical. They make fine food for animals, including chipmunks, mice, shrews, red squirrels, and songbirds that poach seeds right out of the cone. As lumber, old-growth Douglas fir is coveted for its strength, its workability, and tight-grained, rosy gold beauty that sands to a silky finish. I write on a hand-made desk of Doug fir. It's 6 feet long. As a living tree, it is the anchor species of the moist forests west of the Cascades, so this was royalty that I was about to encounter. A Douglas fir soaring more than 20 stories, armored with thick plates of bark, the discovery tree glowered with gravitas. It had stood for some 4 centuries, and here I stood, hoping not to show that I was nervous. No, it was way worse than that. I was hoping to survive this encounter that loomed large as this tree in my tiny, short, little, marshmallow soft mammalian life. It was time to climb. I pushed down on the ascender, latched to my foot, and at the same time slid the climbing knot up the rope. I went up maybe a few inches. The top looked quite far away. Inch. The first few moments were a wreck, my feet still on the ground and questing for the lift of the tree's branches to take over, but I didn't yet have enough height. I struggled, sweating. I looked over at Schultz. He was already up and climbing smoothly. A veteran of many climbs, he had worked for years in tree canopies of Central America. This was a climbing snack for him. His confidence, though, boosted mine. One more push of my foot and slide of the climbing knot up the rope, and finally my feet were off the ground. I careened into the trunk of the tree, and its solid wooden rebuff hurt. But I'd come all the way from my home in Seattle for this, and the weather was predicted to shift to an afternoon thunderstorm, so this needed to start working now. What I needed was more momentum, push, slide, and keep at it. Finally, I was clear of the swell of the tree's trunk at its base. Higher up, I hung free, truly in midair, the tree bearing my weight. I looked over my right shoulder. Yes, I was aloft, in the death zone, as climbers call it, above 50 feet, where any fall is likely fatal. Yet, the occluding fear that took all my attention at the start had backed off a bit. I began to trust the rope and the harness, to see and to feel where I was. The trunk before me was scaly and plated, a sign of the tree's great age. Above, the lattice of branches extending from the trunk beckoned. As I climbed, the distinct worlds of this one tree were revealed. The air smelled pungently of conifer needles and sap. Emerald moss clung to the trunk. The light was changing, brightening as I climbed higher. Old man's beard lichen draped the branches, blowing in the wind, painting the air green. Fat, juicy mats of moss topped the branches. A soft rain began to fall, more of a mist, cooling my face and silvering the tree's needles. Higher still, I got my wish, a broad branch perfect for sitting. I hitched myself over, perched like a bird, and looked out. This was a totally different view of the forest, the canopy seen from within. It was not the smooth dome it appeared to be from the ground, not at all. I noticed big gaps, vast open space yawned all the way to the forest floor, where much smaller trees were getting their start. Gray spears of the broken tops of weathered cedars pierced the canopy below me. I marveled at a sea of greens, the nearly black green of spruce, the malachite green of cedar and fir. The roughness of the canopy was such a surprise, with so much space between the tops and the trees of such variety of heights, ages, types, and sizes. This was no monoculture plantation, smoothly uniform as broccoli tops. Schultz and I paused for a bit and just hung out, gazing all around. He talked about one of his earlier jobs in his career, climbing in Central America, and all the ticks he had to pick off when he got home. So lucky were we here in our Douglas fir redoubt, our treetop nation of two. As I kept climbing, the branches were getting shorter and smaller in diameter, and the tree more open, the view gaping to the soaring, free air. I looked out into the open sky to distant mountains and finally relaxed fully, leaning back in the harness just for fun, enjoying its comfort and the spring of the rope. I dropped my head back, spinning in all directions. This was the raven's view, the realm where the tree's needles were combing the high winds. It was fun. Okay, next slide, please. So all this fun in the old growth, next slide, please, quickly gave way to this, which is when the book shifted for me. I told you this was not the book I intended to write. I thought I was just going to wander the drip line of the old growth forests of the Pacific Northwest and kind of update the old growth story because it had not been told since about 1992 in a book. But what happened after Jerry and I left the beautiful Cedar Flats old growth forest was he said, I want to show you something. So I said, all right, let's get in the truck, let's go see it. And this is where he took me, about 5 miles up the road. Now, we've all seen this, or I don't know, maybe you haven't seen a truly industrial-sized clear cut like we do them in the Pacific Northwest. But basically, this is what you see on lots and lots of private forest land that's used for industrial forestry in the Pacific Northwest. And as you can see, it's heavily trashed. This is not a place that's ever going to be a true natural forest again. This has been herbicided, replanted to a monoculture. Maybe someday it'll grow into something. I couldn't say for sure. Jerry is a very erudite and gentle and soft-spoken man, but when we came here and he showed me this, he was virtually shouting. And the reason for that is because he doesn't think there should be any more conversion of natural forests to places like this. And I'm going to read to you a little bit about why that's so. And I want you to get a little bit of an appreciation for what kind of scientist he is, and how he learned what he learned about the forest, because I love this about him. In this passage, I'm reading a long quote from him, and he's explaining about how he discovered why dead and down wood is important and the kind of reception he got for that science. And then he talks a little bit more about forestry itself and what's wrong with the kind of bill of goods that he and other foresters were sold about this kind of industrial forestry. You can leave that, it's fine. We learned by looking at the old forest. That is how we were taught. And the richness and the complexity of it also taught us to be humble. It was a tremendous object lesson in humility and respect as well as knowledge. The lessons in terms of knowledge, but also lessons in terms of you have to be pretty arrogant to just assume this is nothing more than a source of wood, and you can essentially duplicate it by planting rows of trees. We took a lot of shit from ecologists that thought this was just a hobby thing. We had a lot of negative feedback on the dead wood work, attacking it as just hobby stuff that had no relevance to science. A place like Harvard would have nothing to do with it. It wasn't the sexy sort of stuff, the hypothesis testing the academic scientists are so excited about. I was often angry at the Eastern ecological community, the ones writing all the papers, writing all the textbooks. What they were writing wasn't taking account of the forest that I was in, and I was bound and determined that one of the things I was going to do was to see these theoreticians have to take account of these forests. We established it was an important structural element in the forest. Dead and down wood has to do with the mortality of trees, not just leaf fall or branch fall. That means an investment of time. This lack of respect for time is what's wrong with industrial clear-cuts, Franklin found. The plantation-style forestry that robs everything the old trees had taught him was important. The herbicide that kills the young-growing understory that feeds the soil, the replanting with a monoculture that will never have the complexity of structure, age, or species of a true natural forest. These conversions of natural old forests to plantations were stealing from the future. These once naturally forested sites were now croplands that could never become the old growth of tomorrow. I refer to plantations as one of forestry's great deceptions, Franklin said. We were fooled. People have to realize that all is not well. Foresters deceived themselves into thinking plantations are forests, and they are not. These are great for the stockholders, but nobody else. Jerry Franklin. So at that point, I really felt this book shift for me, that it was no longer going to be only about the wonders of old growth, but an inquiry into how we lost so much of it, given that it is so magnificent and that it is so important ecologically, and that we know that by now. So how is it that in BC, where this picture is taken, they're still cutting old growth? That is a 1,000-year-old tree lying on the ground. So when you're a reporter and you begin reporting, as I told you, you've got one idea of what's going to happen as you continue your work, and then sometimes something else happens altogether. Next slide. So this clear cut in BC, it came up for me because I was meeting Suzanne Simard, the author of Finding the Mother Tree, for a week in the woods in BC to work with her and her field crew. And I thought the idea was we were going to meet at the motel and just go find her crew and get started. But instead, what happened was, as we're going down the logging road looking for the crew, we almost get run off the road by a logging truck that's carrying a load of logs that are so large it can only carry 3. So picture how big that is on a flatbed trailer, how big those would have to be. And so she yanks the truck to the side so we don't get hit by this thing. And the other biologist in the car was Teresa Ryan. Now, she's Tsimshian, and she's from the Raven clan. And she notices that there are these ravens circling and calling and crying. And she yells at Suzanne, stop right now. And she cuts the engine and we sit there. And what Teresa goes on to say is, you know, that's the mother, and she's lost her nest, and the babies are crying. And then she said, we needed to pick up some of the pieces from this trashed landscape and take them back to the big house, the smokehouse, their ceremonial house, and burn it to honor the spirits for this violence that had been done. And she said, not only to the trees, but to her ancestors directly. Because her people buried their ancestors in bentwood boxes in the trees. And so they become part of the chain of being. They become part of the soil. They become part of the trees themselves. And so in cutting these trees, they had violated the animals in this forest, and they had even violated her own ancestors. So what happened for me in that moment was an understanding that she understood the forest differently. It wasn't only about the wood coming out of there for products or money. These trees were literally kin, and that kin included all the animals that the trees take care of. That her cosmology, her understanding, remember, she's a PhD trained Western scientist also, is about a more than human world and more than just wood. She's really thinking about a forest in multiple dimensions because that's what her people were taught. Next slide. So being with them for a week, next slide, in the woods, watching them delve into the soil in uncut old forest groves, which, by the way, were also completely unprotected, what they were seeking was to understand this complex world of an old growth forest, even in the soil itself. How, when you're in a place where the soil's been being made by trees for 10,000 years, is different. Why? Because she and her crew want to begin rehabilitating all of these cutover lands to try to help them come back to life. And so to do that well, to accomplish restoration, you need to know what the baseline condition used to be, dimensionally, including the soil. Next slide. And Teresa, who's pictured here, also taught me a lot about the intertwined, gorgeous ecology of what are called salmon forests. Now, this isn't just a metaphor, and it's not a woo-woo thing, it's a real thing. So, for instance, in the Adams River in BC, when there's a big salmon return, you can see it from space because the color of the canopy is darker green, and you can see it with satellite photographs. And that's because these salmon, coming back from the great pastures of the sea, are bringing the nitrogen and the phosphorus in their bodies. They leave the freshwater stream of their birth when they're about this big. They go out to the ocean and gain all their body size over 2, 4, 6 years. And then by a miraculous ability of migration, sniffing out the home water of their stream in parts per million when they're out in the ocean, and different magnetism fields and other things they can sense. They make their way all the way back to their birth stream, to the birth house of these forests. And when they do so, they die, salmon spawn, and then they die. And so their bodies become the nutrition for the forest itself, the nitrogen and the phosphorus. It's not only the land that they feed, it's the bears and the martens and the fisher cats, all the animals that come to eat, all the insects. One of my favorite scientists on this topic was kind of a mad scientist. His favorite thing to do was put on night vision goggles and go out and sit in the old growth and watch the bears. Because this beautiful transmission of nutrition, it's mediated by wildlife. That's what's completing the circle. It's the animals that bring the carcasses into the forest and then also poop out what's left. And that feeds the land. And the trees, in turn, take care of the salmon because they hold the soil so you don't get runoff into the stream that smothers the salmon eggs. Furthermore, they cool the water with their beautiful canopies. Salmon are cold water animals. Anything over 55 degrees is a problem. And so the cooling influence of the forest is essential. And there's all kinds of wonderful nutrition coming down from the trees, all kinds of leaf litter and needles and bugs, things for baby salmon to eat. And so it's this beautiful circle of goodness of the salmon bringing this nutrition back to the forest and the forest sheltering the salmon. And if you leave it alone, it can go on forever. Next slide. Being with the native people up in BC, that's Ernest Alfred from the Namgis Nation seated with her. Next slide. what I learned sitting with them in the big house and learning about their ceremonial ways of enforcing abundance in the forest and in the streams is if you are the chief that's taking care of the stream in your territory, success means this, a feast. You have so much food from your territory, you can invite people from all over the region to your big house, and you can put on a feast with oratory and song and food from your home place that lasts for days. Next slide. This is not managing as we do under the Endangered Species Act, just trying to beat extinction and counting fish to smaller and smaller numbers. This is management for abundance. It's permaculture. Yes, they're using the salmon, and yes, they're using the trees, but they're doing it in a way that it lasts for the next generation. They're keeping the wealth in a living ecology. Next slide. And there's so much joy, there's so much fun. These are people who live in communities that are based on an essential connection to their lands and waters. Next slide. And so much courage. This grandmother from the Montaguila First Nation, she decided to just go and do a one-person land back in her people's traditional territory on Vancouver Island with help from students at UBC who built her a cabin and floated it up to the mouth of the river. She went and put it in the woods and just stayed there all winter long by herself. Her family was frantic, but she did it. And if you look at her, she looks happy, doesn't she? Next slide. But this was the one that got me the most. So this is a bark scar on a cedar tree, probably taken several hundred years ago. Now, cedar is called the tree of life in the Northwest cultures of Native people because they got everything from the cedar. The bark would have been shredded for baskets and for baby diapers and for clothing. These trees would have been planked for houses. Every now and then they'd take an entire one for an ocean-going canoe, but mostly this was permaculture, taking a little bit of a tree so it could last through the next generation and the one after that. When Captain George Vancouver sailed into Nootka Island to start taking out the sea otters, and then many others came from all over the world to continue that process, he encountered thousands of people from the Moichat, Muchatlat, and Nootka nations living right there at Nootka Sound in large longhouses, and they were sustaining themselves also from the forest, from trees like this. Now, the Muchatlat people, just a few years ago, got tired of the fact that Western Forest Products was cutting down their old growth forest and they were getting nothing for it on unceded territory. So these are lands where they never signed a treaty with anybody, they never fought a war with anybody, and yet here's Western Forest Products cutting down their trees. So they went to the Supreme Court of British Columbia and basically said, what are you doing here? And sued for right and title and said, you know, we have a vision for creating salmon parks to stop logging these lands, end the industrial logging, and let these lands recover to take care of the salmon once again. A 1,000-year vision of recovery. But before they could do that, they needed to regain management of the territory that they had never ceded, to which BC Supreme Court lawyers argued back, oh, terra nullius, there was nobody here. There was nobody here when we arrived because they didn't see, you know, farms and white clapboard houses. And so you know what they did? They took the testimony of trees like this. An archaeologist who was involved in this case submitted the testimony of these trees, stripped with bark scars 600 years ago, 400 years ago, and entered it into the record. So the trees themselves spoke on behalf of these people, and you know what? They won. They didn't get it all back, but they got a very important strip back, and now they're on appeal trying to get the rest. So next slide, please. These are very hopeful stories, and they're corrective stories to this. So this is Maine. I was so struck by the power of these original knowledge and management systems that had been on the landscape for thousands of years that when I was researching this book at the Harvard Forest, I took one of the ecologists there who was my main comfort animal and advisor, John Thompson, aside, and I said, so John, how is it, when did it happen that we changed over to this complete commodification and financialization of nature, given that it was such an extreme departure? And he said, well, he looked at me first, like, you don't know this? And And then he said, well, Maine, the birthplace of industrial forestry in America. So our people arrived wood famished on these shores and took a look at what was there, and you know what happened next, right? So starting in Maine and then continuing across our country and continuing today in BC has been this displacement of the original knowledge system with commodification. Next slide. And because I was a Bullard Fellow and I had a little money, I rented a plane. And I went up and I looked at the northern forest of Maine. Now, this is a miraculous place. I'm going to say this twice. 10 million acres of privately owned forest land. 10 million acres of privately owned forest land. And this is what it looks like after several hundred years of cutting. This is called strip cutting. And sadly, it's the response by the logging industry to an initiative by the citizens of Maine to stop clear cutting that was happening at the township scale. May I remind you, that's 26 square miles. So this is what some people call ABC, anything but clear cut. It's cut to death, but it's not a clear cut, it's strip cut, but it's worse because you're getting the same amount of logs, but look at the edge, look at the disturbance. It's twice as much edge for the same amount of wood. It is very disruptive for forest animals like pine marten, very difficult for wildlife to persist in a place like this. Next slide. Look how small it is. These itty bitty tiny trees, this is what they're down to. Nothing there is bigger around than a coffee can. We call this clip, chip, and ship. So, it's clipped off at the bottom with a mechanized cut. This is not Paul Bunyan, no Babe the Blue Ox. This is just one guy in a machine with a little clipper that chips that up, cuts that off, and then it's chipped. And it's shipped usually to become Amazon boxes. So, when you think about this magnificent landscape of planetary importance for migratory birds, and so many other reasons, this historic forest that you can read about in Thoreau's North Maine woods, that makes me sad to see that it's come to this. Next slide. Because the towns are even worse off, because this is what they were using those tiny little logs for so many years, was pulp and paper. So look, I use paper, I write books, I worked at newspapers for 40 years. I use forest products and I care about them, but this is wrong. I mean, you basically now have the version of the Rust Belt of Detroit in the state of Maine along the Penobscot River from the Canadian border to the head of tide. Town after town has been left with carcasses like this of dead and long gone pulp mills. Next slide. And what in the world are they supposed to do? This is a very expensive cleanup, and in the town like Lincoln, once called Stinkin' Lincoln, they're trying very hard to start over, but that's hard to do when you've been left with something like this. Next slide. And next slide. So I thought to myself, all right, I don't want this book to be just about gloom and doom and problems. I would really like to hear about solutions, other ways of harvesting forest products that aren't so damaging, don't go so hard on the land, and don't leave a legacy of pollution in a river like the Penobscot that at one point was so polluted it turned colors. So I asked the Penobscot Forestry Department leaders if I could go and look at some of their land with them. How do they do what they do? And this is what they showed me. This is their forest land. And so what's different? Obviously, lots of standing trees still. It's been harvested. It had been cut the previous season. I was there in February, and they've been cut that fall. But as you can see, they've left a lot. Next slide. They've also gone very easy on water. Instead of putting in culverts and roads, they try to use temporary bridges and just basically go as light on the land as they can. The other thing that struck me, we kept getting interrupted by animals. So many moose that day, so many turkeys, so many birds. So it was a very different feeling to be here than some of those other pictures I've showed you. The other thing that struck me had nothing to do with trees. It was when Chuck dropped the tailgate on his truck and got out the little grill and these really bright red hot dogs. They're called snappers. Do you know about this? Okay, so they're so red. I've never eaten something that red in my entire life. And I think I'm still digesting it. It was absolutely delicious. Next slide. So I thought, okay, fine, that's a tribe, and I was inspired by what I saw, but I thought, what about the commercial people? What are they doing that's different or better? What could be different and better? And so when you're a stranger in a strange land and you need to meet people and learn stuff, what do? I went to the University of Maine in Orono, introduced myself and told them that I wanted to learn about more progressive logging practices. And they said, oh, Molly, you need to meet Molly London, Logger of the Year. I thought, okay, Molly's getting a call. And so Molly, to her great credit, allowed me to go out with her crew. And I love it when people do that. It's a very trusting thing. She's never met me before. And we go out, next slide, with her husband. And notice how young they are. So like, yeah, with her baby right there on the front. There are not very many young loggers, just like there aren't a lot of young farmers, because the equipment's very expensive. But for her husband, he's second generation, and so they were determined to give this a try and make it go. And for me, what was exciting about them is their client. Anybody want to guess? You'll never guess. It was the Appalachian Mountain Club. Thank you. So the AMC, as you know, is the oldest outdoor club in the country. And they have ongoing at this time what they call their Maine Woods Initiative. And it's in the 100-mile wilderness. And what they're doing is through donations, buying land. And they do 3 things with it. 1, no touch, leave it alone, wilderness forever. 2, recreation, put in trails, some of those wonderful off-grid cabins that we all love. And this is what they do with the other third. They log it, and they log it in a restorative manner. And you're thinking, oh, sure. And you should think that, because you should be skeptical. But here's what's different about what they do. Instead of just taking it all, what they do is they very selectively cut, because what they're working with are these heavily trashed paper company lands, and they're trying to open them up, rehabilitate them, take out the little stuff, sell it, make a little money for more conservation land purchase, and that's going to become toilet paper, low-value forest products that we all need and use. But they're going to leave the better stuff to become saw logs and be higher-value forest products. So this was exciting to me, number one, because they were hiring Molly and her husband, local people. So this is a local solution that's creating local products for local people. And I will tell you, when we think about what are we going to do, what are the solutions to this forest crisis that we're in, this is what it's going to look like. Every different place is going to have its own answer. Our country is too varied, our forests are too varied for any one thing. But these locally inflected solutions in which local people are doing the work and thinking up what should we do, that was very exciting to me. Next slide. I'm going to read to you a little bit about what it was like to cram into the cabin with Arthur here. There was only one chair. He shared it with me. We were just butt to butt in this little tiny cab. I'm going to tell you what it's like to run one of these things and what it was like to be with him doing this different kind of logging. The tree canopy trembled as Arthur Hawthorne started up the machine and began rumbling into the woods, flattening a trail as he went. These were tiny trees, just saplings and poles with a few larger trees grown from a clear cut in 1992. The goal on this job was to thin out small trees and leave the larger ones to grow to improve the quality of the remaining stand over time. This was formerly paper company forest land off the Stud Mill Road in Down East Maine, and these thinnings were now grown to barely merchantable size for pulp. Hawthorne was working to a set of instructions and a prescription from the forester for the management company for these lands, privately owned by one of the world's largest landowners, John Malone. Yeah. He was to cut 40 to 60% of the stand, taking first any fir 6 inches in diameter and larger, any damaged trees and aspen and white birch 8 inches and larger. He was to leave any undamaged spruce 6 inches or bigger around, and yellow birch, particularly the strongest, most wind-resistant trees. This thinning work is where loggers like Hawthorne on equipment like this, a cut-to-length processor, show their skill. Hawthorne scrolled and tapped his fingers on the screen of the iPad suction cup to the inside of the cab of the wood processing machine. The lines he drew on the screen, he would now cut into the forest. So really sophisticated modern equipment, very careful prescriptions. And the big thing he's trying to do as he cuts is not make a mess. It was really interesting to spend the day with him. They teased me a lot, of course, which I expected, because after all, these were going to become probably toilet paper, all these logs and so forth. And so they said to me as I was leaving, don't forget when you go to the bathroom. You know, he's right. We should keep the people who create our forest products in mind. They're doing essential work in critical places. Next slide. So the other thing that's going on in Maine that I found incredibly inspiring is fish passage. Now, this is a state that hasn't worried about fish passage for sea-run fish in like 100 years, right? Next slide. So that thing that you just saw was what I call the salmon-nator. It's a little elevator to bring the fish over the Milford Dam so they continue in their journey. This is even better. This is what used to be the Vesey Dam. Full-on took it out, and look at it. It looks fantastic. I mean, I would say to you, whenever you're feeling despair about our Earth and our planet, this is what you need to remember. Anytime you take the foot off the neck, nature comes back. I've seen it over and over. Look, you all are sitting in a place that's home to one of the most important rewilding and reforestation facts in the world. I mean, all people did was leave the farms 150 years ago, and now you're surrounded by all of these spectacular forests. They came back. And with them came the animals. You are living with more wildlife closer to you than Thoreau did. So take heart in that and take heart in this. You can count on nature everywhere, every time. Next slide. So to sit there on a beautiful spring night and know that there were millions of sea-run alewife herring making their way upstream, that was very healing and exciting. Next slide. Look, there it is, an Atlantic salmon. I had only seen one before in a bumblebee can, so I thought that was great. Next slide. They're big. Look at it. I mean, we're salmon snobs in the Pacific Northwest, but I'll give it to you. That's a salmon. Look at it go. It's an Atlantic salmon. I was thrilled. You know, they'll get maybe 1,200 in a good year in the Penobscot. To us, that would be pitifully small, but in the Penobscot River, it is a miracle, and nothing short of it. And it's not just the Atlantic salmon, it's the whole tribe of silvery fish that are coming back from the sea. The lamprey, the alewife, especially the alewife, those little things, those little darlings, you know, they're gonna feed the land. They're coming back by the million. It's incredible. Next slide. So I went out with Sea Grant to get a sense of the Penobscot in the spring. As I told you, this is a place that was so polluted it was turning colors not that long ago. Well, they were looking at it with a kind of sensor that looks at the biomass in the water, and here are these spectacular clouds of fish. It was such a beautiful thing to see, and it was so fun to listen to them because they do this census every week through spring and summer, and they've been doing it for 10 years since dam removal started. And what they're seeing is this steady increase in biomass in the river, which I would call life. Next slide. Here's my favorite part. So all throughout the North Woods of Maine, of course, there are miles and miles and miles and miles of logging roads, many of them with culverts. Culverts are a problem for sea-run fish because usually they're too small, which means the water velocity is too fast for them to actually navigate, or they're crushed, or they're perched. They're too high for the fish to get in. Well, nobody cared about that forever in the North Maine woods because there weren't any damn sea-run fish, so who cares? But now they care because suddenly lakes with names like Silver Lake have a whole new meaning as the alewife are coming home, and the salmon too. So the Appalachian Mountain Club is pouring all kinds of money into replacing these crushed deadbeat culverts with these beautiful bridges to improve fish passage. Who's doing the work? The local people who have these field engineering skills from putting in the logging roads in the first place. Next slide. Like, as a matter of fact, Molly London's father-in-law, who put me in his big, beautiful Dodge Hemi and rumbled me around the logging roads to show me all these bridges that he had put in himself. Next slide. And he's so proud of each and every one, he signs them with welding bead. So to me, that is a very, very hopeful and beautiful thing. Thank you very much. So I'm here for you, and I'll answer questions. Anything you want to ask me? Yeah, or talk about. Yes.
So with your hopeful messages, you mentioned earlier on in your talk about your visit to the Harvard Forest, and I guess out in Petersham,
Yeah.
right? And you alluded to the idea that it's starting to decay some.
Yeah.
But my real question is, nature does come back, but nature is being put at a huge disadvantage by climate change.
True.
And I'm wondering if there's any research either connected with Harvard Forest or something else that begins to illustrate the likely monoculturalization of things because of climate change, or maybe it's just other species. So I don't know if you have any thoughts.
I do. Did everyone hear the question? Yes? Okay. So I can give you an example. So in the Hemlock Hollow, which is a beautiful hemlock grove at the Harvard Forest, over the 10 years that I've been visiting there, when I first used to go there in summer, it was like walking into a library with the shades down. Wonderfully cool, wonderfully dark, because hemlocks, as you know, carry their branches all the way down. And so they create a very specific light budget and water budget, and they have a very specific suite of birds that utilize them. They really set the tone. Anywhere they are in a grove, it's a hemlock grove and nothing else, and you wouldn't mistake it for anything else. Now, as I've been going back to visit it over the years, we call it hemlock hospice, a term by the scientist Aaron Ellison, who with David Buckley Borden created an art installation on the Hemlock Hollow Trail to get people to think about, and more importantly, emote about what's happening to our New England woods. And as these hemlocks have fallen apart, shredded, fallen, and become just a lacework of chewed up needles because of woolly adelgid, it's very interesting what's happening. There is a young forest rising underneath it. It almost feels a little obscene. It's like giggling in the intensive care ward. You know, there's this resurgence, and it's black birch. So, of course, that's a deciduous species. It's still going to be a forest, but it's going to be a very different forest. The light is going to be different. The water budget is going to be different. The bird species that utilize it will be different. And so I don't think what you're going to see is a monoculturalization, but you are going to see a wholesale changeover of species in our forests. Now, remember, change is natural in our forests, and these forests in New England have been through kaleidoscopic change over thousands of years. What's different about what's happening now is the speed. The change in what's happening to these forests in my lifetime, and I'm not that old, is truly frightening. I mean, working with the scientists at the Harvard Forest and some of the old growth groves in the Adirondacks, that was really distressing. That's a place that's been, you know, adamantly protected for a very long time. And, you know, those forests are in late stages of decline. You don't see old beech at all, anywhere. So, you know, what's going on, as I said at the beginning of this talk, is these combined forces of climate, hot drought, and unchecked global commerce. This business of no phytosanitary controls is very serious. Shall we list them? Woolly adelgid, emerald ash borer, beech bark disease, beech leaf disease, spotted lanternfly. I could go on, and this is after losing chestnut and after losing elm. And right now, what to me is a great sadness is the ash. We're losing our ash trees because of the emerald ash borer. Basket weaving from ash by the native people is the oldest art form in New England. And there are people, artists now, today, who don't know if they're going to be able to pass that art form on to their children. Because there's only one thing they can make those baskets from, and it's dying. So that's a long answer to your question. I don't think we're going to see a monoculture. And out where I am in the Pacific Northwest, and most especially down in California and Eastern Oregon, the hotter, drier forests, we're starting to lose forests completely. They burn so often, they reset to grass. And so you're going to be talking about weed world. I hope someone has a more optimistic question. Yes?
But it's now a forest fire.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, you enlist that as something that is challenging the forest.
Yeah, it is. I mean, where we are in Western Washington, these are what we call the moist forests, and that's not a place where fire is a frequent visitor. At the H.J. Andrews Experimental Forest, 3/4 old growth, it had not burned in 500 years. Well, I wound up with a whole new ending for my book because it did in the summer of 2023, and we lost about 3/4 of it. So when I say lost, that's the wrong word entirely. The trees are still standing, they're just black and burned. And in some places, very lightly burned, but in other places, it melted the scientific equipment. So I was just there in the spring and walking all through it with an ornithologist, and it's fascinating to see a forest reset after a burn like that. There was a whole new suite of bird life. There's a woodpecker that only comes in when it smells smoke. So it's not the end of the world, but it sure is a change. And at where we are, we're starting to see fires in places where they're not unheard of, but for them to be that hot and to come to a place like that, and with the kind of frequency that we're starting to see, that's different. And then, of course, California, I don't even know what to say about that. I mean, these conflagrations. And in BC, I mean, you all are getting the smoke from Canadian fires at this point. So this is all because of climate change. I mean, fires like the ones we're seeing, this is because of this force of hot drought in which the trees are dried out and the heat is literally pulling the moisture out of the trees. And so that makes them vulnerable to bugs and it makes them terribly vulnerable to fire. It's also the management systems of some of these forests where they actually were not cut for many years and they become overgrown, overly dense. And fire will go through a place like that like nobody's business. This is not the moist west side forest I'm talking about. It's the dry side forest where, you know, you get these conflagrations. Forest fires of historic size. So fire. Yeah. Yes, in the front.
It's really interesting. You mentioned that Western very
Oh, yeah. Right. Bentwood boxes in the trees, and others use canoes. Yes, that's right. Yeah. What a beautiful thing. I mean, the idea was quite intentionally to let them return to the great chain of being. And so that was the custom, which is why Teresa was so upset, because she was literally watching the ancestors go down the mountain. And I get actually goosebumps when I talk about that even today, and it was such an opening of a door for me of a way to think about a forest as something more than wood. You know, she thinks of these forests as kin, literally. And even though we don't have that kind of direct connection as they do, because we don't have that practice, I do think the idea of thinking of forests and the 9 human beings in them as part of our connected world that we care about is exactly the transition that we need to make at this time. So my call to action for all of you is to change your relationship with forests, change how you think about them, not as commodities, but as kin. And furthermore, to understand that where for us, maybe out there, it's about saving the last bits of old growth and mature forest. For you all, there's not much old growth left to wrap your arms around, but every tree matters. Your city trees matter, your town trees matter, your yard trees matter, to the birds, to the insects, to the planet, to the next generation. So I'm thrilled at the conservation work that you're doing here. And, you know, when I come into these towns in New England, I'm thrilled at these giant canopy trees. It's spectacular, the sound of the night insects, the shade, the birds. It's absolutely beautiful. And about 100 years ago, none of it was there. So be proud of that and be glad of what you have and take care of it. Every tree matters, and plant more. And not only that, but keep them growing. Yes, yes. So the question is, can we define what's an old growth forest? And are there tracts in the Northeast? Yes and yes. So people, ecologists and foresters will fight over this term of old growth all day long. And in fact, there are many of them who will just tell you they're just done with trying to come up with an ironclad definition. But generally speaking, we're talking about something that's in at least 200 years of age, and it's it's going to depend a little bit on the species, but we're talking 100, 200 years old. If you start getting down into double digits, that's probably not going to cut it. We want at least 3. And yes, you have old growth here in New England. You even have it in Maine. Yeah, it's out there. And if you're curious about this and you'd like to sniff some of it out, there are all kinds of wonderful websites. The Old Growth Forest Network, which is Joan Malouf's organization. This is an NGO that she formed. And she has, with volunteers, identified old growth forests all over the country, including in New England, that you can go visit. And there's a map on her website, tells you where they are and their attributes. And so I really commend that to you as a starting place. The Native Tree Society, which is started by Bob Leverett, he's just a big tree nut. And he has a wonderful directory of old growth trees and forests. They're not necessarily big. The oak trees on Wachusett Mountain, those are some of the oldest oak trees known, and I walked right by them because they grow on a wind-blasted mountaintop in rock, and so they don't look like much, but they're very old. The big ones aren't necessarily old, and the old ones aren't necessarily big, but they're still here. Well, you've been a wonderful audience. We've got a book table back here and a local bookseller. I'm very happy to sign books for you, and thank you very, very much.